accredited business programs or health programs, they want to make everyone look alike. They usually want to have faculty that have PhDs, or you have to have so many faculty members, you have to have so much square footage. And I think in all of these cases, as many institutions have tried to get this specialized accreditation, I think it's just driven costs in a lot of ways. And at the same time, has not really, I think, made better quality programs.
Yeah, I want to pick up on something that Kate was saying, which is that the market, the way competition works in higher ed is fundamentally different than the way it works in pretty much any other industry. So we're basically in higher ed providing a bunch of subsidies to consumers. Now in a competitive marketplace, that would typically tend to lower the price that the consumer has to pay because the businesses are competing with each other to get the business, and all they care about is what they get. They don't care whether it's subsidy or from the consumer, so the consumer would end up paying less. It doesn't happen in higher ed, and the question is why? Well, the way colleges compete is by prestige, essentially, which is what Anne was talking about. They're basically trying to get as good a reputation as possible. They're all trying to become Harvard. Or if you're a 2-year school, you're trying to become a 4-year school. If you're a 4-year school, you're trying to become a better 4-year school. And you just keep trying to climb up this ladder. And the question is why? And this is something that all of us have picked up on. We don't tell students what they're getting in return. All you really know is where you're going, how much it costs. And you don't even really know how much it costs until you actually enroll. That's pretty much what we tell them. And then we have no idea what kind of outcomes are. So colleges can't compete on value. The University of Phoenix can't be like, we're not Harvard, we'll give you 60% of the education you get at Harvard, but we only cost 30% as much. They can't do that. And this is hugely problematic because that means everybody just needs to try to become Harvard. And of course Harvard spends a ton of money, and that's why we're spending a ton of money in higher ed.
And I think you also have a pathological competition at a certain level based on amenities and buildings. I mean, we now find these institutions that got to have the fanciest rock climbing wall, they've got to have a new student center. CNN just did a big survey looking at some of the high-level expenditures, basically on facilities that will be nicer than these graduates will ever have for the next 30 years of their life. And I think this again gets back to how higher ed has really lost its way. Are these educational institutions, or are they football teams, or are they resorts? And I think there's a lot of questions to be asked, particularly of trustees. What kind of institution you're running, and what is your real primary focus? And if it's not on education, then we've really got a problem and we need to push back.
Yeah, I want to make sure we have time to go to the audience for questions, but anecdotally, I just went back to my undergraduate institution and saw that the condos that they now use to house the seniors, and I've decided when I die I want to come back either as my mother's dog or as a senior at Denison University.
Well, and I just and Ann mentioned this in her op-ed yesterday in the journal. You go to a college campus on a Friday, you're not going to find any classes. I mean, college campuses have essentially become Monday, Thursday, mid-morning to mid-afternoon.
I was a department chairman for many, many years, and I'm familiar with
classes.
So rules are the same as before. Please stand, identify yourself, and ask your question, form of question. That would be you.
Hi, my name is Laura Bernstein from Center Worldwide Consultants. I had a question about outcomes and how we measure outcomes, and how do we get at that with the existing student record collection we have in place? Is it possible to work around that? Is that an archaic thing now that the cloud and privacy concerns are sort of diminishing a little bit, or our privacy concerns are crazy? So, you know, how do we connect transcript data to earnings data to evaluate whether or not an institution is doing its services adequately?
Well, I think the gold standard is, of course, doing a unit record where we tie educational records to employment outcomes. But we can get around that if we have to. And if we just reported the average earnings by major at each school, that would revolutionize the way higher ed works in this country. The fact that we don't do that is insane. But we can get around it. We don't need the individual level. I mean, it'd be great if we had that for researchers and whatnot, but we wouldn't want to report that anyway. But what we really need for competitive reasons, or to spur the right kind of competition, is kind of the average.
I would add that you don't have have to violate people's privacy to give good aggregate information about outcomes. For researchers, they always want more and more and more. They want to know where every person was, where their GPS location was, things like that. We don't necessarily need that much to create a better functioning marketplace. We might want to do that if we were to see in the long term where did our investments pay off. I've had arguments with people, especially about the gainful employment, which does link people's program of study to their earnings from the Social Security Administration, all in a kind of way that we're not looking at individual data and not getting individual data. But you can do it.
We have time for one more question. Go ahead.
So I'm Jane Lucas, I'm with Senator Pugh. I feel like we're discussing a lot of problems on the institutional side, but we're not discussing interest rate costs. And now that's pretty much centralized in the government. And we're ignoring the fact that, particularly on the higher ed side, the reconciliation bill cemented interest rates as high as 7.9%. So the government is making money hand over fist on the backs of students. And it seems like we're really focused on loan forgiveness programs, but should the focus be more on making the interest rates that students are charged by the federal government more in line with what the economy is charging us for any other type of investment?
So the question is whether interest rates charged by the government should be closer in line to market rates.
You could do that. It would cost, quote unquote, cost money because then we have the former CBO director here because of the baseline and how it's calculated. I don't know that we would be opposed to lowering interest rates for anyone. I do think there are bigger problems. When the interest rates were set at what they were, the economy was in a different place, and it seemed like, and I would still actually argue that for a 17-year-old to get an unsecured loan at 6.8% interest with no credit history, like this 6.8 is pretty good. Now the fact that our cost of borrowing is near zero makes it seem like a lot, but you're not going to get a private, essentially what private student loans are, is a loan to say, I plan to use this money to go to college at a lower interest rate than what we're charging now.
Join me in thanking the panel. And we are very fortunate to be joined for some closing remarks by Representative Virginia Fox. Congresswoman Fox is chairwoman of the House Subcommittee on Higher Education and also serves on the Rules Committee. Before coming to Capitol Hill, she had a history in higher education, including a stint as a sociology instructor. We thank her for joining us today.
Thanks, Doug. I'm just going to lean on this since you all are all sitting down there. I came over earlier so I could hear the panel. I know a lot about how things get done in D.C. You get asked to come in and give closing remarks, but you have no idea what went on before. And I don't know if it's my academic background or my work ethic, but I thought I really should come in and hear the panel. And so it makes it difficult, though, to use the closing remarks that I had already prepared, but in conjunction with what's been said. But I'll sort of see if I can meld the two together. I spoke to this group a few weeks ago, I guess, maybe, when you all were talking about student loans, and the president had just made an announcement that he was arbitrarily going to change the way student loans were repaid. He was going to cut, or that students would only have to pay 10% of their income toward their loans, and after 20 years, the remaining balance would be forgiven. He said he was doing that because Congress wasn't doing anything, but Congress had done some things. Actually, Congress had set the program up before, and what the president was doing was simply expediting what was already on the books. That, of course, was very troubling to many of us who believe in the Constitution and believe in the separation of powers and think that the president can't be both the executive and the legislative branch. We haven't really seen this implemented yet, I don't think, and so I'm not sure that we're going to have a constitutional challenge raised to it. I haven't seen anything there. But the other thing that has been brought out by the panel, I think, in many different ways, is that with some of the proposal the president made, we don't have any idea what the impact is going to be on the student loan program. So I think in thinking about how we do things somewhat differently in the legislative branch, if regular order operates, we generally have a better idea of what the outcome is going to be on issues because we get bills introduced, we have subcommittee hearings, we have committee hearings, and we have floor votes. And I think generally things get hashed out a little bit better than they do when the president just decides one day, we're going to do this. We don't know the outcomes. So we don't know what the outcome of that decision is going to be, either in terms of what challenge might come to it or what it would have, what impact it's going to have. Another issue I think that has to be raised, and again the panel sort of touched on this tangentially today, is what kind of a system do we have in this country where people who've gone to college and worked for 20 years and aren't making enough of a salary to pay back a loan over a 20-year period of time? What are we saying about the jobs that these people are getting, that we have to subsidize a system of education that's so costly that even 20 years of work can't pay it off? I think that's an issue that we ought to be thinking about. And again, the panel tangentially touched on these. The thing that I would raise as far as that issue is concerned is, what are the values we're promoting when we say to young people, if you haven't paid this off after 20 years, we'll just pay it for you? What are we teaching them? What kind of responsibility do they have for their own education? And are we saying, you take on an obligation, but you don't fulfill that obligation, somebody else can take care of it for you? What does that mean in terms of spreading out? I think we have, again, as has been pointed out by several of the speakers here today, we have a lot of money going into higher education from many, many different places. And one of the things that struck me, and as a person who was in higher education for a long time, but has been in the legislative, on the legislative side for a while, but I haven't been as involved with higher education as I used to be, how many think tanks and groups there are looking at the various issues that are out there. And I think that's a very healthy thing that's happening, which may be part of why people are beginning to get the information they need to make the comparisons, to make the judgments that they need in terms of higher ed. And I agree. I think Ms. Smith mentioned that she looked at U.S. News and World Report when she was in middle school to decide how to make a decision. Other people talked about the amenities and the facilities that schools have. My colleague Judy Biggert said to me yesterday, just before the hearing we had on lowering costs for going to college, that she was on a campus recently in her district, and there's a brand new building going up, and it's a fitness center. And she was saying to herself, what in the world, with the schools struggling for money, are you doing building these palatial buildings that's a fitness center? And the people at the school said, we have to do this to attract students. So it gets us back, I think, to a core question is, what is the role of higher education these days in our society? I think in many cases what we've seen is simply campuses and the systems doing all they can to self-perpetuate themselves. They're not going after the students on the basis of academic quality, but on the basis of the amenities that they have on campus. They're living off of their reputations, and they really can't prove to the students that as a result of their attending that institution, they're going to get the skills and knowledge that they need to be very successful people out in the real world. We had a wonderful hearing, I think, yesterday in the higher education subcommittee, and I know at least one person who's here that was there yesterday because that person spoke to me. But I want to say that I think what came out of that is that there are colleges and universities who are grappling with the cost of higher education, and they're looking for ways to bring that cost down. And in many ways, that's also self-serving on their part because they want to stay in business. But it seems to me they're approaching the issue from the right perspective. They're saying to their students, we want to continue to offer the service that we're offering. We know that we're offering a good service. We've been successful in the past. People still want to come here. And if we're going to stay in business, we have to look at ourselves, not just pander to the latest fad that's out there with students who want a certain thing on their campus, but that we're going to look at how we can offer you value, as people have mentioned here today, and at a lower cost, or at a cost that you can afford, saying that to the students. I think most of you know my basic philosophy is that I don't think the federal government has a role in education. I'd like to get the federal government out of education completely. That's not going to happen overnight. I think ultimately, as money becomes more and more of a problem, you're going to see changes made. And I think that the attention that's being paid now on how much it is costing for not just higher education, but for all of education, with those concerns, with the emphasis on quality, and the emphasis on lack of accountability and lack of results, that we are going to see some changes. I would like to say, Ms. Smith, to you, I think I heard you say that the White House had published the gainful employment rules and regulations, and there hadn't been much controversy about that. Now, oh, you were
Yes,
joking.
I was joking.
Oh, okay. Well, I was too far in the back. I'm glad I raised that issue because I wanted to say, obviously, you are in the deep, deep bowels of the West. You had not, if you hadn't heard much controversy about gainful employment, but I want to say again, I think the panel did a terrific job today of raising lots of good issues. I'm glad to see such a terrific group here because I do think this is an issue that is going to get a lot more attention in the next few years as the public begins to question. And I think one of the, again, best things that came out of the hearing yesterday is one of the speakers saying that he had parents come up to him on the opening day or the moving in day and say, we did a lot of comparison shopping before we chose your campus. And he said that's the first time that he'd ever heard parents say that to him. And I think we're going to see that happening more and more. I think the cost of going, how much people have to borrow is obviously going to be an issue. But I think we're headed in the right direction in terms of shedding a lot of light on the issue of student loans and the cost of higher education in general. And I would end with one comment that, again, one of the presenters said yesterday, which really struck me. There was a committee looking at a program, whether to keep it or not to keep it, and they were tied 3-3, and they couldn't decide whether to eliminate it or not. And somebody on the faculty said, well, if money is really an issue, then yes, we should do away with it. Well, you know, we've come a long way in higher education if we do have faculty who begin to ask that question, is money really an issue? Because in not too distant past, nobody would have ever considered that as a question. Thank you very much.
I want to thank the Congresswoman again. Again, thank the panel, and we are adjourned.